Hello, class. We're going to be talking about sexual identity. And I know this could be a really heated topic in today's culture, and there's a lot of differing opinions. I'm going to be talking about things, and I know maybe some of you don't agree, and that's okay. You don't have to agree with me, and that's not the goal that we all think alike. I don't even think that's God's goal that we are all the same in our personalities or our opinions. However, I just want you to be mindful as you have assignments or again that you're answering discussion boards that we are all people, like real people with real lives and real experiences. So we just want to be kind. Nothing that has happened thus far has been that way or dishonorable to anybody. You guys are doing amazing with your discussion boards. Like very impressed, honestly. Very, very impressed. Um, which is a lot because that's saying a lot because I've been reading discussion boards for years now. However, I just want to put that out there because this can be a very polarized subject. Also, I just want to encourage you all to stay healthy out there. I know my family got hit this past week with a tummy bug. I know stuff is going around. So stay safe out there, stay clean, wash your hands. Also, too, if something comes up, you're ill, all those things, just message me. We can work together. I'm not a mean person. Okay. So we're talking about sexuality right now and the development of sexuality. And I think there's a lot that plays into our sexual identity. I think it depends on, like, again, we talked about nature versus nurture. So, we have those components. Then we have like who's in the home as far as children being raised, who's in the home, even siblings, like what's the gender of the siblings that are in the home. It has to do with, I think, experience. It has to do with trauma sometimes. Um, there has to do maybe even with friends and influence. There's a lot that can play into how you feel about any subject, right? And so those are things that I think we need to be mindful of when we're taking into consideration where a person is at, right? And how they're identifying themselves. And so, you know, um, that's just something I take into consideration when I'm looking at the big picture, right? It's very easy to be focused in on one part of the picture, but there's a much bigger puzzle, right? Much bigger, like as we span out, and from our house to our city to our county to our state, like all those kinds, as we kind of span out of a person's life and see like the over encompassing world view, right? Like all the things of them, then it kind of makes some more sense about what's going on in the very, very, very close view. Okay. I hope that makes sense. Um, I hope that makes sense. So, anyways, so our sexuality is meant to be authentic. And it's who we are as sons and daughters of God. It's meant to be who we are as people, right? And I don't mean who you are as people. But it's like God intended sex for our good, for our pleasure, and it's an act of worship, all the things. So it's meant to be part of our authentic selves. Our sexuality is to be trustworthy, a part of who we are in selfhood and relationship. And God designed for belonging, connection, and purpose. And intimacy, when we talk about sexual intimacy, is the closest we can be physically to another person. And so, again, it is a way to be connected. And so there's authentic where you're true to yourself. There's inauthentic when you're not. So inauthentic sexuality is not a real version of, it's a counterfeit version of yourself. Sin in our world, unfortunately, has distorted what God intended for us in all kinds of ways, right? It's distorted how the family is. It's distorted with who we see ourselves to be. We're clouded by maybe ambitions or things that aren't of God or of the world. We feel like we have to be a type of way because of the world. It's a struggle, right? Sin is a struggle. We all struggle with sin. Sin can pervert or taint what is true in a lot of ways. And I think we've seen that a lot in our culture with pornography. It has tainted intimacy. It's tainted how people view themselves. It's tainted a view of women. It's tainted a lot of things. It's caused people to like maybe chase pleasure in ways that are grotesque or illegal. Um, it's just really perverted things, and people think that aren't even Christians. That's just, it's not good for you. You have people like Billie Eilish speaking out about pornography. um there's a lot of different people who have struggled with sexual addiction or have struggled with just what it's done to their brain, because we can't undo what we've seen, and it affects actual real physical intimacy. So we all struggle to be covenant keepers, meaning we all struggle to not fall short and to with sin. That's why God sent Jesus, and that's the beauty of Christ and the blood of Christ, is that covers us from our sin. But we all struggle to be, relationship centered, authentic sexual beings according to what God designed for us. We all have that struggle. And so, it's making sure that we as Christians, we're it's a gift. We want to be authentic. It's a spiritual act. Sexuality is far more comprehensive. It's a comprehensive matter than mere genital sex, right? There's like this whole idea that we're fully connected, like spiritually, physically. It's not like our culture really wants to say is like, oh, I can have sex and it's just sex. And I think I was talking about this with even a client recently, like, yes, I mean, yeah, there's this carnal, like, I just want it and I'm going to get it. But I think also, too, like, when you want to have like pleasurable intercourse, like pleasurable sex like, it's hard to not catch feelings or have expectations. Because we were talking about situationships or people you just hook up with. And my client and I were talking about like, is it possible to not develop feelings for someone in that way? And I go, it's a and this is someone who's not a believer, doesn't hold those standards. I mean, I think it's hard for not one person to, like, when you're sharing such an intimate experience. I think our world wants to say it's not intimate. It's not personal. It's just like carnal. It's just like I have a need and I'm getting my need met. Like, I'm hungry, I want to get food. But it's like, it's so vulnerable. It's a vulnerable experience. Like, someone could really hurt you in a sexual experience because they're so close to you and you're defenseless in some ways. And so, like, to have someone to be that close to you and not have it and just be meaningless or be someone you don't even know, I don't think it makes for the quality of sex that we're intended to have. Um, it should be our minds, our emotions, our memories, our self, like, all of it kind of goes into it. It's like this outpouring of an outpouring of what I'm feeling played out physically in some ways, right? Sex. We just talked about this in human sexuality. And so I don't know, like, do I think people can be very nonchalant about it? Sure. Obviously. I think culture really pushes that. But as we see, I don't think that's actually true. We see it all the time in the office, all the time. People wanting more from somebody that they're hooking up with when it was just hooking up. Friends with benefits, situationships. These are all the things we talk about in session. Yeah, there's a depth to it, and it's hard to not act like that's there. And a lot of clients, when they have one night stands, they regret it. They're just kind of like, wow, that was, maybe in the moment it felt really good, but afterwards there's a lack of fulfillment, you know? So anyways, those are things that we're working with people. Those are the things that, again, our culture pushes. That's not what God wants for us. He wants us to enjoy it, to have it be this connection, this depth, this level of something that you have with somebody that you don't have with anybody else. It's special, right? And that sounds so cliche and so stupid maybe to some people, but that's the design for it. That's the intention for it. That's the security in it when it's like, this is just you and me, it's safe in some levels, right? Or it should be. Sexuality embraces our ways of being in the world as persons embodied with with biological male and femaleness. And so, again, there's a spirituality component to it. So there's a sexuality and spirituality are not separate, but part of a creative way that God has allowed us to express ourselves. And I think that's something that we sometimes forget. Like, it's a good thing. And this is where I think sometimes the church, I don't say that all the time now. I think things have gotten a lot better, but where the church has gone wrong, because it's like sex is bad, sex is bad, sex is bad. And then when it's time for people to have sex, they're very confused and they feel very thrown off and they feel like they're dirty and gross. And that's not the intention. Like, sex is not bad. I think what we're striving for is holiness. And so everything leading up to marriage, it's not about penetration or that makes you holy, your virginity and all those things. Like, what makes you holy is striving to be holy, And so, you got all these you got all this pressure to not have sex till marriage, but you're doing all the things, but that doesn't make you a good person. It's striving for what God designed for you to be. And he's striving for us to be holy and trying to be holy. Are we going to fall short? Of course. What we do with that, though, is what matters. And so it's meant to be this beautiful thing in the context of a marriage relationship. Spiritual fulfillment is yielding ourselves to God and being filled with God's Spirit, which transforms us, and our will becomes God's will. And that's God's will for us. Does it always happen? No, but that's God's will for us. Sexual fulfillment is a climactic experience between two people who totally give themselves to each other. And that's the beauty of it, right? There's a selflessness to it. But that's the beauty of it. That's the beauty of it. And the part that I think what we're trying to achieve, and so theology needs to affirm the goodness and desire, or we will be reluctant to integrate sexuality with spirituality. I think it's normal. That's what I would love for kids to know as they're in those teenage years, that the desire to be sexually active or to have sex is very normal. Like, and that's natural and that makes sense. Like, back in Jesus' time, they were getting married at like 15 because they died at 30. I mean, I don't know. I'm being dramatic, but you know what I mean? Like, they got married young. They had sex young. They had sex too for procreation and blah, 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 all the things. But it's that part of it is natural and normal, but we shame it a lot in the church. That's not to be shamed. It's like, what do we do with that though? How do I express that though? How do I deal with the fact I'm supposed to be striving for holiness, but I have these feelings and desires. So how do I acknowledge, like, that's normal? Now what do I do with them, right? That's where therapy can come into play. That's where open conversations with parents is so important. Because a lot of families, they don't talk about sexual things. And so as a result, kids go to their peers who more than likely have it all wrong, or they're getting told these things through TikTok and Instagram and YouTube and whatever, porn, all those things. And we're trusting the world to teach our kids and not the parents teaching our kids. And the parents need to be proactive in talking to our kids about these things, because it is very normal. It is very natural. It's how we handle it that we can be problematic, right? And so we want to reach out to God in those with temptation and all those kinds of things. And he can be a comforting presence in the midst of desire and want. And we want to desire in God more than we desire things of this world more, obviously. But those are some things that, sexual desire is normal. Finding people attractive is normal. That's part of life. Like, you're not going to be totally ignorant to everybody around you. But it's, again, how we handle those things that can be problematic. And so talking with kids and minors about this is really important. And I think that's where we get it wrong often. And so spiritual apathy keeps us in a defeated and self-negative place as victims of life, lacking energy or passion for God, yet expecting God to do miracles in our life if we lack desire of growth. And a passionate seeker of God is one who risks reaching out with desire and growth. Intimacy with God can keep expressions of our intimacy within appropriate limits. I think the more the more we dive into the Lord, the less we're going to want to dive into the world. The less we're diving into God, the more we're diving into the world and getting validation from our culture, getting validation from our peers, getting validation from people who tell us everything we're doing is right versus what God says, And it's like that that's where the truth is. That's where the proof is in the pudding, right? Like how your behavior is kind of reflecting where you're at with the Lord. I can sense that in myself sometimes, how my anger is, my frustration level, like where my heart is, right? Like how you act when nobody's looking is a reflection of your integrity and character. So true, right? Like anybody can be out in public and put on a good front and say all the right things, and that was some of the Pharisees, right? They were out saying all the right things and doing all the right things, yet Jesus called them whitewashed tombs. They looked good, but on the inside they were dry bones, right? And like God wants the outpouring of our heart to be the proof of who we are. And our desire to be of the world, or is our desire to be of God? And how we are as parents or adults, as examples to others, that's what they're seeing, that's what they're watching. And that's the stuff, like, not to be convicting of you or your situation, but that's like the honest truth. Like, it's convicting to me. Like, there's always, I mean, this is the thing, we can always be growing, and changing and apologizing and seeking forgiveness. Like, we're never going to get it all right, right? Like, it's an ever going process. But our desire is in our heart being in the right place turns out with better outcomes versus if our heart is in the wrong place. A deep desire to follow God's ways keeps us in rightful connection with God and others. Wrong desire separates us from God and one another. When we look at different people in the Bible, like David and Bathsheba, his heart was not in the right place. He should have been at battle, but instead he was home. Instead, he was watching a woman bathe on somebody else's rooftop. And then it was like this downward spiral of bad decision after bad decision after bad decision. Did God forgive him? Yes. Were there consequences for his decisions? Absolutely. But you can see like you weren't where you were supposed to be. You're doing something you're not supposed to be doing, right? Like, and that's where I say, by the grace of God, there go I. All of us are capable of a lot of things and making a lot of bad decisions. And being in this seat as a therapist, I think I could have very easily been a very judgy person prior to becoming a clinician. And then I meet all these people and they've all had these circumstances and life's happened to them, or a decision happened and they made it. And now they're in this circumstance. And I think, man, that could be any one of us. That could be any one of us. We're all capable of making a poor choice in a split second. Most people who have an affair, they don't get married planning on having an affair. They say it happens. And it happens because it's usually a slow progression to something that first starts with disconnection in the relationship. Then someone's giving attention. Then everything maybe might be harmless, maybe a little questionable, but then it progresses and progresses and progresses until it's a major situation. That's how sin is. It's something small, and then it gets a little bigger, and then a little bigger, and then it's out of control, and then usually it catches up to us in some way, So this is why God wants us to stay. He wants us to stay on the right path. He wants us to do the right things because the road is easier, less bumpy. But we tend to mess that up a lot of times. Again, human sexuality is established in a differentiation of male and female and the unity established between them. Sexuality is a good gift meant to draw a person's deeper levels of knowing God. And humans are born with an innate capacity for sexual pleasure, and human sexuality can best develop within an emotional, caring, and trustworthy family environment. Which this is what we're seeing, right? With this whole course is like in a caring, trustworthy family environment, people tend to thrive. And if you're not in those kinds of environments, there tends to be issues. And a lot of times, obviously, with children, that's outside of their control. They can't choose who they're born to. But unfortunately, there's a lot of things that happen as a result of a lack of attachment, a lack of safety, a lack of abuse or neglect or things like that happen in families, unfortunately. And that's where we come in to come alongside to kind of help and to kind of guide. We do this a lot with adults that unfortunately that was their circumstances, or minors that was their circumstances. And then we're trying to not we're um we're trying to not reproduce the same generational curses that were going on for years, and you see the reoccurring curse, you see the reoccurring situations. We're trying to undo those things, break those habits so that people can thrive, you know so I hope this is helpful to you. Again, we're halfway there. I hope you guys have a phenomenal week. If you have any questions, please let me know.